So we're continuing to discuss functions. So recall that when we talk about lines, we usually talk about them in the form of y equals mx plus b. Well, now we're going to be changing it, and instead of y equals, we're going to be saying that f of x equals mx plus b. So I want you to write that down. Make sure you have that written down somewhere, that we say this f parentheses x is said f of x. Or we could also say it's the function f evaluated. It's the function f evaluated at x. It's very important that you understand when I say f of x what I mean. So all we're doing is the y value in the equation is replaced with f of x. And f of x, which represents the outputs, is read as f of x. We just talked about that. And sometimes we're going to use letters other than f. Sometimes we're going to use g of x or h of x. That's okay, or r of x. It doesn't matter. So if we wanted to write the following equations in what we call function notation, instead of y equals 5x plus 3, it would be f of x equals 5x plus 3. And number 2, instead of y equals 3x minus 100, it'd be f of x equals 3x minus 100. And number 3, instead of 2x squared plus 3x minus 4, it's going to be f of x equals 2x squared plus 3x minus 4. So when we evaluate functions, what we are doing is we are substituting a value for x or y to get a value for the other. So that means we're either taking something that's x and putting it in and getting out y, or we're taking something that's y and putting it in and getting out x. So how we actually do this, it says find f of x equals x plus 5 given f of 2. When they give us this notation, f of 2, they're saying x equals 2. That's what they're telling us. So we've got to plug in 2 for x and see what we get. Well, 2 plus 5, if we actually add these two together, we get 7. So this now says that f of 2 equals 7. So that means a couple things. That first of all means that our x value is 2. And second of all, remember f of x or f of 2 is the same thing as saying y equals. So this is also telling us y equals 7. So this is the ordered pair 2, 7. So if we look at number 5, it says f of x equals negative 4x plus 7 when x equals 2. This time they were really nice and they just said x equals 2. So we're going to rewrite this as f of 2 equals negative 4 times 2 plus 7. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. And negative 8 plus 7 is negative 1. So that tells us two things. It tells us our x value is 2. It tells us our y value is negative 1. Number 6. We have f of x equals x squared plus 2x plus 1 given f of negative 3. So they're telling us that f is negative 3. So we're going to rewrite this as f of negative 3 equals, and always make sure when you're replacing your letters with numbers, you're putting it in parentheses. So negative 3 squared plus 2 times negative 3 plus 1. Well, negative 3 squared is 9. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6 plus 1. And 9 minus 6 is 3 plus 1 is 4. So this tells us that our x value here is negative 3 and our y value is positive 4. So if we look at number 7, now 7's a little bit different because they're saying that h of x equals 2. So they're telling us that y equals 2. So we're going to have to do a little bit more work. So we're going to rewrite this as 2 equals negative 2x minus 7. And we have to solve this for x. So we're going to add 7 to both sides, 2 plus 7 is 9 equals negative 2x. Then we're going to divide both sides by negative 2. So x equals negative 9 over 2. So that tells us that our ordered pair is negative 9 over 2, comma 2. Because we got that x equaled negative 9 over 2, and it told us originally that y was 2. Number 8, we have g of x equals 2/3 x minus 5, when g of x equals negative 7. So again, they've given us a little bit more complicated problem. So we're going to rewrite this. Instead of g of x, we're going to put negative 7 equals 2/3 x minus 5. To get x by itself, we're going to add 5 to both sides. Negative 7 plus 5 is negative 2 equals 2/3 x. I'm going to set this up as a proportion because it'll make our life a little bit easier. So we're going to cross multiply. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. 1 times 2 is 2x. And then to get x by itself, all I have to do is divide both sides by 2. So x equals negative 3. So a lot of work, but it's okay. We were able to do it. So it tells us x is negative 3, and originally they told us f of x, or I'm sorry, g of x, which was negative 7, so y is negative 7. So then lastly, number 9, f of x equals x plus 5, given that f of x equals negative 7. So we know that we're going to rewrite this as negative 7 equals x plus 5. So we're going to solve to get x by itself. So we're going to minus 5 from both sides. So we get x equals negative 12. So that tells us two things. It tells us that our x value is negative 12. And since f of x was negative 7, we know that our y value is negative 7. So how does this look in a word problem? Well, we have the situation, let f of t be the outside temperature at degrees Fahrenheit, t hours after 6 a.m. So thinking about this, we know that it's normally x and y, but we're going to say instead of x, they're using the letter t, and instead of y, we know that it's f of t. So t represents our time after, that's important, after 6 a.m., and our f of t is going to represent our temperature. Our f of t represents our temperature. So we're supposed to explain the meaning of each statement. So first of all, they're giving me 0 in here. Well, 0 is telling me my time is 0. Notice, remember, our time was our time after 6 a.m. So if it's 0 hours after 6 a.m., they're telling us that it is 6 a.m. So we know that it's 6 a.m. The temperature was 58 degrees Fahrenheit. That's what this sentence is telling us. 6 a.m., the temperature was 58 degrees Fahrenheit. So we look at the next one. So in the parentheses, again, that's our time. So our time, they're telling us, is 6, but that's 6 hours after 6 a.m. So think about 6 a.m. 6 hours later would be noon. So at noon, the temperature is in degrees Fahrenheit. We don't know exactly what it was. They said it was in. Ooh, number 10 uses inequalities. So we've got two things. We have two different times here. So this first one, our 3 says our time is 3 hours after 6 a.m. So remember, 3 hours after 6 a.m., that's going to be at 9 a.m. So we know that the temperature at 9 a.m., that's what the left side represents. On the right side, this is our time that is 9 hours later. So 9 hours after 6 a.m. So 6 a.m. to noon was 6 hours. 3 hours later would be 3 p.m. So this right side is our temp at 3 p.m. And this symbol here in the middle, that symbol is made with your left hand. So what it's saying is the temperature at 9 a.m. is less than the temperature at 3 p.m. So it was cooler at 9 a.m. than it was at 3 p.m., which really makes sense when you think about it. So we're going to use the graph to figure out how we can also do the same process. So it says to find f of 2. So remember, this means that x equals 2. So to do that, we're going to go over from our 0, 0. We're going to go over 2, and we're going to find a point on the line at that value, which is here. This ordered pair right here is the ordered pair 2, 1. So what that means is that when x is 2, y is 1, or f of 2 equals 1. So now it says to find f of negative 2. So we're going to go over to negative 2, and we're going to go up, and we have a point on the graph right here. So we need to figure out what that y value is. So we're going to go over, and that y value there is positive 1, 2, 3. So f of negative 2 is positive 3. And then lastly it says if f of x, so if f of x equals 2, that's the same thing as saying y equals 2. So we're going to go to 2 on the y-axis, which is here. Oh, and there's our point. So we didn't really have to do a lot of searching this time. So we're going to put a point there. And that x value is going to be 0, because that ordered pair is the ordered pair 0, 2. So 14 says to complete the table using the function f of x equals 2x plus 5. So what we have to do here is we have to plug in all of these values for x. We have to take all these values for x, and we've got to plug them in here for this x and see what we get. You're probably going to want a piece of scratch paper for this or something, but so we're going to take f of x, which is our original function, equals 2x plus 5, and then our table, remember, had the values of negative 5, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, and 0. Those are our x values, and we're going to find f of x. So we're going to take these values for x up here, and we're going to plug them in for this x here. So let's start with negative 5. So we're going to say f of negative 5 equals 2 parentheses negative 5. So when we take a letter out and put a number in, we put it in parentheses, plus 5. Well, 2 times negative 5 is negative 10, plus 5, and negative 10 plus 5 is negative 5. So that's our first value in our table. Then we're going to do the same thing with negative 3. So f of negative 3 equals 2 times negative 3 plus 5. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6 plus 5, and negative 6 plus 5 is negative 1. Then we do the same thing with negative 2. So f of negative 2 equals 2 times negative 2 plus 5. So notice that every time, whatever value I put here in this parentheses, I'm putting in here for x as well. So whatever goes here, goes here. So negative 3, negative 3, negative 2, negative 2. I'm taking x out and putting in the number that they gave me up here for x. So if I continue this one, well, 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. And negative 4 plus 5 is negative 1. I'm sorry, it's positive 1. So in our table, we're going to put 1. So then our next x value up here is negative 1. So we're going to do f of negative 1. Well, that's going to be 2 times negative 1 plus 5. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2 plus 5, and negative 2 plus 5 is 3. And then lastly, we're going to plug in 0 for x. So 2 times 0 plus 5. 2 times 0 is 0. And 0 plus 5 is 5. So that's my last value in my table. So now we're going to fill in the actual table up here, or at least I'm going to. So at negative 5, we got negative 5. At negative 3, we had negative 1. At negative 2, we had positive 1. At -1, we had 3, and at 0, we had 5. So it next asks us for f of 1. So if we want to find f of 1, then we want to replace x with 1 and see what we get. And 2 times 1 is 2, plus 5. 2 plus 5 is 7. So we continue our table and put 1 on top and 7 on bottom. It asks for f of 0. We already found that. We know that f of 0 equaled 5. It also said if f of x equals -3, we need to find x. So this time they're giving us y. So we're going to replace, instead of f of x equals 2x plus 5, we're going to put -3 equals 2x plus 5. And we're going to solve that. So we're going to minus 5 from both sides. So -8 equals 2x. And then to get x completely by itself, we're going to divide both sides by 2. And that's going to give us -4 equals x. So there's another point we can add in of -4, -3. So now we're supposed to graph all these points to this graph over here on the right. So we're going to start with -5, -5, which means I'm going to go to the left 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and go down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to put a point there. And then my next point was -3, -1, so I'm going to put a point there. My next point was -2, +1. I'm going to put a point there. My next point was -1, +3, so I'm going to put a point there. My fifth point was 0, 5. That means I'm not going to move left or right. I'm just going to go up 5, and I'm going to put a point there. And then I saw these two other points I had to find. So 1, 7. 1, 7 says I'm going to go to the right 1 and up 7. And that's where my next point is going to go. And lastly, I found the point -4, -3. So I'm going to go left 4 and down 3 and put a point there. So notice these points will roughly make a line, and that's very important that they make a line because that tells us a lot about this particular graph. It tells us it is a linear function, which we also knew that because we have studied linear functions, and notice it just had x. This is in y equals 2x plus 5 form, or y equals mx plus b form, where 2 is going to be our slope, and b is going to be our y-intercept. And last but not least, we have problem 15. The graph shows the number of miles a helicopter is from its destination after X hours on its first flight. So let's look at the graph. So it starts off at 0 hours. It says it's 300 miles from its destination. So that tells us that when it starts off, it's 300 miles away. And then it tells us that at 3 hours, it's 0 miles from its destination. So that means it took us 3 hours to get there. So that's the things we've learned from our graph. On its second flight, the helicopter travels 50 miles farther and increases its speed by 25 miles per hour. So it has a further distance, but it's going faster. And it says the function f of x equals 350 minus 125x represents the second flight, where f of x is the number of miles the helicopter is from its destination after x hours. Which flight takes less time? Well, we know the first flight took 3 hours. That's something we know. So what we need to figure out is we need to figure out how much time the second flight takes. So we've got a couple ways of doing that. So they gave us a graph and they gave us a table over here to the right. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug in some numbers. We're going to plug in some x values to see what happens. So starting off, I'm going to rewrite this down here. We had the equation y equals 350 minus 125x. And they were really nice in our table here and gave us our x values of 0, 1, 2, and 3. So we're going to plug those in. So we're going to figure out, first of all, what's 350 minus 125 times 0. So that means if we haven't gone anywhere, how far away are we? Well, that'd be 350 minus 0, which would just be 350 miles. So if we haven't gone anywhere at all, we haven't spent any time in the plane, we're 350 miles from home. We do the same thing with the next value, y equals 350 minus 125 times 1. Well, that's going to be 350 minus 125, which is going to give us 225. So after 1 hour, we're only 225 miles from home. Then if I plug in the next value, 2 hours, that'll be y equals 350 minus 125 times 2. And that's going to be 350 minus 250, which is going to be 100. So after 2 hours, we are 100 miles from home. And lastly, if we plug in 3, so y equals 350 minus 125 times 3, that's going to be 350 minus 375, and that's going to give us negative 25. Well, that doesn't make sense. We're negative 25 miles from home. What that actually means is that after 3 hours, we've already made it home. We could have actually gone 25 miles further. So the question asks us, which trip took less time? Well, that's kind of easy to figure out. We know the second trip took less time because after 3 hours, we'd been home already. We could have gone 25 miles further.